if you're new to hanging drywall or you don't hang drywall on a regular basis, you're going to have gaps in your drywall, sometimes big ones. And there's a solution to that. It's called Prefill. Now, even though I'm a contractor, I was a contractor, I don't hang drywall every day and I'm not a pro at it. So I have gaps. I mismeasure sometimes. I forget where the lights are, or I miss a receptacle. I miss with some screws. I go through all of that. And really what keeps me sane and what saves my bacon is the idea of Prefill. So what is Prefill, you're wondering? Well, it's when I use a quick drying compound. I use Durabond 90 and I prefill all my joints, my butt joints, my flats, any missed screws I go over. Why I use something like Durabond 90, or maybe even some people will use Sheetrock 45 or Sheetrock 20, is because it dries extra hard and it dries quick. And when you're operating in a basement, drying time is one of your enemies. What the Prefill does is it prevents movement in your sheets. If you're going to use regular drywall compound, it doesn't dry quite as hard. And if you have these big gaps, you want to make sure that if there's any movement, those gaps are filled so it doesn't allow for that between the sheets or between your pieces. The other reason you're using that compound specifically is it also helps for drying time. Regular compound will take longer to dry. The premix, or the powdered mixtures that you use, the compounds, they are chemical drying. They don't necessarily need a lot of air. The air helps, but they will dry chemically. So they'll bond harder and they will shrink less. I'm not saying they will not shrink, but they will shrink less. So it's important to keep that as part of your thought process as you're doing it. Now, when am I going to prefill? I'm going to prefill before I put my tapes on. So there's some things I got to make sure of when I do it. Are all my sheets on and fastened properly? Do they have enough screws in them so that they don't move? Do I have my screws properly sunk in? Now, if you're not using a drywall gun or a drywall dimpler, as they may call it, and you're using an impact or a drill, you're not a pro. Your screws aren't going to be straight or fully in. Don't worry too much about it as long as you're filling those gaps, but you're going to have to go over, so you're going to need a Phillips screwdriver to screw it in as you go along. You're going to want to make sure any blowouts are cut out. So that means the paper that's ripped or fuzzy or hanging, you want to get rid of that, because that's going to affect, well, as you apply the mud, it's going to get wet and that's going to bubble potentially. So you want to cut all of those out. I've got all of that put together. You want to make sure also that your lights, your plugs, your switches, all of those are cut out so you don't get to the taping phase and things are moving around, you're cutting it out, because then your screws will pop and you're going to have to repair that. The tools you're going to need are pretty simple. You're going to need sort of a 4 or 6 inch drywall knife, a mud pan. You need the Phillips screwdriver, maybe your impact or something. You're going to need some tape. So either whether you're going to use mesh tape, you're going to use paper tape, you're going to use fiber fuse. You're going to use that for flat tapes or your patch. So you have all your tools. You're going to pre-fill and do all this stuff before your tapes go on. There are some moments where you may need to flat tape, so you have that little tape on hand. We've explained why you're going to pre-fill. Now, what do? When you're mixing the Durabond, okay, you want to be sure that you are making it a little cakey, shall we say. Almost a little bit thicker than drywall. You're also going to want to make sure that all your butt joints are V-notched. What that means is where the two end pieces, the 4-foot lengths, they're butted together, that you've kind of cut out the paper at the end and you have a little bit of the gypsum powder exposed so that you don't have any furries or loose paper. We talked about that before. Some people do not believe in pre-filling their flats. I do, because mine are not always super tight. So I'm making sure that there's some compound in there to prevent for movement. When I am mixing the Durabond or whatever compound you're going to use, I am mixing it somewhat cakey. Almost like thicker than icing you put on a cake, to put it that way. So you're putting in enough water, not too much. Remember, it's a quick drying compound, and if you're not putting enough water in, it may dry a little quicker than the 90 minutes that it's allotted. But don't worry too much about it. You can just mix more. You will never mix the exact right amount. You will either mix too much and you're going to have to throw it out, or you're going to mix too little and you're just going to have to mix more anyways. And now you're going to have too much and you're going to have to throw that out. So don't sweat it. Just scoop it out and put it in the garbage. Or you can do what I do, which is I just leave it in the pan and then it dries super hard. And when I have to use the pan again, I curse at myself because I was too lazy to clean it when I should have. And now I got to do it before I apply all my other mud. So don't beat yourself up if you go doing that. Now that you've mixed it kind of cakey, and the reason you mix it cakey is that you're filling these big gaps. And if it's wet or not thick enough, it's going to start falling out of the gaps. It's almost going to spill out or cave in, especially if it's something on your ceiling. You don't want to press it into the gaps and then all of a sudden it just starts oozing out. That is not what you want. On the ceiling, that's important. In your big crevices, that's important. On your V-notches, that's important. Any gaps you have, you want to make sure that they are filled appropriately. What you're doing now is you're getting ready for the tapes to make sure that you're creating a flat surface and a uniform surface so that when you apply the tapes and the mud that comes after, those gaps are filled, because your drying time will be longer if you do not fill that gaps and it gets filled with your regular mud. Your regular mud's going to shrink. Those gaps then will shrink, and now you have to apply more mud again, which will take longer to dry, and that becomes a whole long process, and we're trying to limit that as we go along. Areas where the prefill gets sketchy. So you're going to prefill all your inside corners, any gaps that you see in your bulkhead, in where your joints meet, around your receptacles. When the joints or the gaps are kind of big, you may have to, say, especially in corners, do what we call flat taping. So if you can fit some drywall in there, great. I'm kind of lazy, so I just go, well, I'm going to flat tape it with stuffing the Durabond in, and then I'll take some of my tape, which you need to have on hand, and then I'll skim it over. So now I'm creating a link between the drywall paper and the flat tape, usually leading into a corner. Because your corners have the tape folded and you're going to have sort of like a 3/4 of an inch overlap in the corner, maybe an inch, depending on the tape you're using or whatever. And you want to make sure any gaps are covered. If your tape does not cover the gap and you have exposed drywall edge where Durabond meets, that has the potential to crack. So this is why we're flat taping. In my corners, if I have a 1/2 inch gap and the drywall is secure, I just stuff it in and then flat tape that. Or if I don't need to flat tape it, if it's kind of short and the tape is going to cover it, I just run the tape in so that it's all covered and it looks like I never missed. You're going to have misses. When you have screws, missed screws, which you are going to have, I don't want you to be upset about it. You're going to take the butt end of your drywall knife, you're going to press it in, and then you're going to fill that. So the reason you are pressing it in is because you have sort of ripped paper that's a blowout. You want to indent that so that when it comes time to fill it, you don't get that little blowout, a little sort of rough edge or exposed paper as you're coating it, and you don't end up with a bump. You want to recess that and then fill it with the Durabond or sheetrock or whatever compound you're using. This is your first step. Everybody I talk to that does drywall, we all believe in prefill. You are not going to drywall like a pro, but there are lots of steps we're going to talk about along the way that are going to help you have a finish that is closer to what you want than not. We're going to take those steps. Okay? Thank you for watching, and good luck on your project.